Most people believe their life is controlled by what happens to them. Bad situation? They feel bad. Good situation? They feel good. They react automatically, without thinking. But here's the truth. There is a space between what happens to you and how you respond. And inside that space is your power. The difference between people who stay stuck and those who take control of their lives is how they use that space. In this episode, you'll learn the psychology of being proactive, how to stop reacting emotionally, and start responding intentionally. Because the moment you take control of your response, you take control of your life. Most people don't realize how much of their life is driven by reaction. Something happens, and instantly, they respond. Someone criticizes them, and they feel hurt. Something goes wrong, and they feel frustrated. Plans fail, and they feel discouraged. It feels natural. Automatic. But that's exactly the problem. Reactive behavior is automatic behavior. It happens without awareness. And when your actions are automatic, they are not truly yours. They are controlled by external events. This means your mood, your decisions, and even your direction in life become dependent on circumstances. If things go well, you feel in control. If things go wrong, you feel powerless. That's a dangerous way to live. Because it puts your life in the hands of things you cannot control. Proactive people live differently. They understand that while they cannot control every situation, they can control their response. And that changes everything. Because the moment you stop reacting automatically and start choosing your response, you shift from being controlled to being in control. There is a powerful concept in psychology. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. A stimulus is anything that happens to you. A comment. A situation. A challenge. The response is what you do next. Most people collapse this space. They move from stimulus to reaction instantly. No pause. No awareness. Just emotion. But that space exists whether you notice it or not. And inside that space is your ability to choose. When you slow down, even for a moment, something changes. You begin to observe instead of react. You feel the emotion. But you don't immediately act on it. This is where control begins. Because in that small pause, you can ask, what is the best response here? Not the fastest. Not the easiest. But the most effective. At first, this feels difficult. Because your brain is used to reacting quickly. But with practice, that space becomes clearer, stronger, and more powerful. And once you learn to use it, you realize something important. You are not your first reaction. You are the one who chooses what happens next. If being proactive is so powerful, why do most people remain reactive? Because reacting is easier. It requires no effort. No awareness. No responsibility. When you react, you don't have to think. You simply follow your emotions. And for the brain, that feels efficient. There's also another reason. Responsibility. Being proactive means accepting that your response is your choice. Even in difficult situations. Even when things are unfair. That level of responsibility can feel uncomfortable. Because it removes excuses. It means you can no longer blame circumstances for your behavior. And most people resist that. They prefer to believe, I acted this way because of what happened. Instead of, I chose this response. But here's the truth. You may not control what happens to you. But you always influence what happens next. And that influence begins with your response. Staying reactive feels easier in the moment. But over time, it leads to frustration, inconsistency, and lack of control. Becoming proactive requires effort. But it gives you something most people never gain: ownership over your life. Everyone has triggers. Situations that instantly create emotional reactions. For some, it's criticism. For others, it's rejection, failure, or feeling ignored. When these triggers are activated, the brain reacts fast. Faster than logic. Faster than awareness. This is why you might say something you regret. Or act in a way that doesn't reflect who you want to be. The reaction feels automatic. Because in that moment, it is. Your brain is trying to protect you. It interprets the situation as a threat. And it responds. But not all triggers are accurate. Sometimes, your brain reacts based on past experiences. Not present reality. A simple comment may feel like an attack. A small mistake may feel like failure. Understanding your triggers is essential. Because you cannot control what you don't recognize. When you become aware of your triggers, something changes. You begin to anticipate your reactions. You see them coming. And that awareness creates space. The same space where choice exists. Because once you recognize a trigger, you are no longer completely controlled by it. The way you speak reflects the way you think. Reactive people use language that removes responsibility. I can't do anything about it. That's just how things are. They made me feel this way. These phrases may seem harmless. But they reinforce a mindset of powerlessness. They suggest that control exists outside of you. Proactive people use different language. They say, "I'll find a way. I can choose my response. I'll figure this out." This shift in language may seem small. But it changes how the brain processes situations. Instead of seeing limits, it starts looking for options. Instead of focusing on what can't be controlled, it focuses on what can. Language shapes perception. And perception shapes behavior. When you change how you speak, you begin to change how you act. You move from reacting to situations to responding with intention. Most people spend their energy worrying about things they cannot control. What others think. What might happen. What already happened. This is called the circle of concern. It includes everything that affects you, but is outside your direct control. When you focus here, you feel powerless. Because no matter how much you think about it, nothing changes. Proactive people focus differently. They focus on their circle of control. Their actions. Their decisions. Their responses. These are the things they can influence. And when you focus on what you can control, something powerful happens. Your energy becomes productive. Instead of worrying, you act. Instead of reacting, you respond. Over time, your circle of control expands. Because consistent action builds confidence. And confidence increases influence. Reactive people shrink their control by focusing on what they can't change. Proactive people grow their control by focusing on what they can. So the question becomes, where are you placing your attention? Because your focus determines your direction. Every day, you make choices. Some are small. Some are significant. But what most people don't realize is this. Even when it feels like you have no choice, you still do. You may not choose the situation. But you always choose your response. You choose whether to react emotionally or respond intentionally. You choose whether to give up or try again. You choose whether to blame or take responsibility. These choices may seem subtle. But over time, they shape your entire life. Because your life is not built in one moment. It is built in repeated decisions. And the more you choose consciously, the more control you gain. At first, this can feel overwhelming, because it means you are responsible. But it is also empowering, because it means you are not stuck. You are not controlled by your past. You are not defined by your circumstances. You are shaped by your choices. And once you understand that, you stop waiting for change. You start creating it. Shifting from reaction to response is not about becoming emotionless. It's about becoming aware. When something happens, your first reaction is natural. It's fast, emotional, unfiltered. But your response is different. Your response is chosen. It happens after awareness. After a pause. After reflection. That pause is everything. Because it gives you time to think. Time to evaluate. Time to decide what truly matters. Without that pause, you react. With that pause, you respond. And the more you practice this, the stronger it becomes. At first, you may still react quickly. But over time, you begin to notice the moment before the reaction. And in that moment, you gain control. This is not about perfection. You will still make mistakes. You will still react sometimes. But the goal is progress. Because every time you choose a better response, you reinforce a new pattern. And that pattern becomes your new default. Behavior is not just about actions. It is about identity. If you see yourself as someone who reacts, you will continue to react. If you see yourself as someone who takes control, your behavior will begin to reflect that. This is why change starts from within. Not just with what you do, but with how you see yourself. Every time you choose to respond instead of react, you send a message to your brain. This is who I am. And over time, that message becomes belief. And that belief becomes identity. The goal is to become someone who naturally pauses. Who naturally thinks before acting. Who naturally takes responsibility. This does not happen overnight. It happens through repetition. Through consistent choices. Through awareness. And once that identity is formed, being proactive no longer feels like effort. It feels natural. Shifting from reaction to response is not about becoming emotionless. It's about becoming aware. When something happens, your first reaction is natural. It's fast. Emotional. Unfiltered. But your response is different. Your response is chosen. It happens after awareness. After a pause. After reflection. That pause is everything. Because it gives you time to think. Time to evaluate. Time to decide what truly matters. Without that pause, you react. With that pause, you respond. And the more you practice this, the stronger it becomes. At first, you may still react quickly. But over time, you begin to notice the moment before the reaction. And in that moment, you gain control. This is not about perfection. You will still make mistakes. You will still react sometimes. But the goal is progress. Because every time you choose a better response, you reinforce a new pattern. And that pattern becomes your new default. Behavior is not just about actions. It is about identity. If you see yourself as someone who reacts, you will continue to react. If you see yourself as someone who takes control, your behavior will begin to reflect that. This is why change starts from within. Not just with what you do, but with how you see yourself. Every time you choose to respond instead of react, you send a message to your brain. This is who I am. And over time, that message becomes belief. And that belief becomes identity. The goal is to become someone who naturally pauses. Who naturally thinks before acting? Who naturally takes responsibility? This does not happen overnight. It happens through repetition. Through consistent choices. Through awareness. And once that identity is formed, being proactive no longer feels like effort. It feels natural. Most people will hear this and go back to reacting the same way. But you don't have to. Because now you understand something powerful. There is always a space between what happens and how you respond. And in that space is your power. So if you want to take control of your life, start here. First, pause before reacting. Even 1 second of awareness can change your response. Second, identify your triggers. Know what situations cause emotional reactions. Third, shift your language. Replace "I can't" with "I'll find a way." Fourth, focus on what you can control. Your actions. Your mindset. Your response. And finally, practice daily. Because control is not built in one moment. It is built in repeated choices. If this changed how you see your behavior, subscribe to Growth Mindset Lab. Because the more control you gain over your mind, the more control you gain over your life. And it all starts with one choice.